This is Bob Wegner, musician, writer, music historian, and radio show host, and you're listening to Talkin' Blues.
I read somewhere that you started piano at the age of 5. Tell me about that. Is it your parents forcing you to play the piano, or is it something that you sought out yourself?
It was probably more the former. I wouldn't say it was done under duress, but I enjoyed it. I didn't not enjoy it. So it was there for a few years, but it was more of a thing that I wanted to do when it became guitar. A little later on when I was 12.
How did that transition happen?
It's funny. I have such a good memory, but I have no memory of that. I remember stopping piano. I remember pretty much everything about learning the guitar, but I don't remember that little middle period when it was just, I don't want to do the piano anymore, and why might I want to learn another instrument? And it's funny. I mean, do we block things out? Memory's a funny thing, but I have absolutely no recollection of that. But I definitely remember my first, second, third guitar lessons and what I learned. But why I did that, no idea.
Am I correct to assume that your piano lessons had to do was based around classical music?
Yeah, I had a good piano teacher, Mr. Camilleri. He's still around. He's in his, I think, 80s in Hamilton. He was a great teacher in the sense that he got me very disciplined. What I did get was the learning to read music and just being faithful to a piece of music and getting the technical chops to some degree down pat. I didn't learn songwriting or any of that kind of stuff, but it was just your classical training type thing, and 5 years of that was pretty useful.
Did you love it, or did you like it, or did you hate it?
I think it was none of those three things. I wouldn't say I hated it. I wasn't overly interested in it, I guess, because it's not that I wasn't enjoying the stuff I was learning, it's that I was under the shadow of an older sibling who was doing far, far better than I was. And she's a brilliant piano player to this day and has largely made a career out of that. And so I was kind of in that shadow. And that's probably why I decided I wanted to do something else.
But how did you feel about music? In general, just music.
So many fond memories of it, but I wouldn't say I was passionate about it. I don't think that became part of my vocabulary until I was about 13, 14. When I was, 13, I was in grade 8. My music teacher was a very passionate guy. He gave us lectures on the Beatles and the Beach Boys and Elvis, and he was an Elvis is alive conspiracy theorist. He was a wonderful guy, but it was just his passion for the subjects that was so alluring, because I don't think I'd ever met anyone before that who was passionate about anything really. So observing that in him, that kind of awakened something in me. And then from there, absolutely, music became the number one thing, which basically it has been ever since. So he's largely the thank/blame.
When you picked up the guitar, what were you hoping? What kind of music were you following?
Well, I mean, at that time, I was into the stuff that was on the playlist of, Q107, Y108, or whatever it was called back then. 95.3, I think, was the Hamilton rock station, Y95. And so the things I really loved were the Beatles and Queen. I got into Led Zeppelin. I knew Max Webster, Rush. I got to know all this stuff, Canadian, American, and British rock. But in my guitar lessons, I wasn't going there initially. I had this Eastern European guy named Boris. I really hope this guy is still alive and I can run into him by accident to thank him, because I was learning Spanish guitar, and I was learning almost Chet Atkins type guitar, where you're multitasking, doing a melody and a bass line at the same time. And that's where the piano lessons came in handy, because I could already read, and I had a pretty decent musical vocabulary for your average 12-year-old then. I learned to do the melody and the bass line at once on the guitar, which is, you know, in my first, second lessons. I mean, as a teacher myself, when I teach students, just you start really slowly, but just having that background already, and I got the mechanics of the guitar down pretty quickly. So within 2-3 months of playing guitar, I was already playing some kind of complicated Spanish and kind of not quite country, but just say learning a Bach piece, but doing it the way that a country player would play it, where you have the melody and bass at the same time. So that was me when I was 12, 13 years old. So I wasn't doing rock and roll at all. That all kind of came later.
How much later?
As soon as I found an electric guitar that a friend could lend me, and then because we didn't have much money, the my dad's stereo became what I plugged into. And fortunately, plugging into the auxiliary, it was auxiliary or a mic input, one or the other, but it had a little bit of gain structure to it for some reason from some old 1970s stereo, but I was able to plug it into that, and it was a little bit of a dirty, crunchy sound, so it didn't sound very pleasant, but it was enough that I could get my lead chops kind of moving in the absence of an actual guitar amp, and because we just couldn't afford it. And so, you know, only a bad artist blames their tools, and you fiddle with what you have, I guess.
I wonder what it did to the speakers.
How's that?
Like, I wonder if you blew the speakers.
Oh, no. Strangely enough, I didn't, because I knew that this was my only option, so I did not turn it up very loudly. And so, no, those speakers lasted for years.
Oh, that's good.
So, no, I did not blow them. I didn't want to annoy anyone. I just wanted to learn how to play. And eventually, a small 10 or 15 watt Fender guitar amp showed up for Christmas one year, and that was a big expense for my dad. He did not have money, and and I was able to buy my own guitar, my own electric. But then it was kind of a Strat knockoff. It was a Samick, and Samick, and I used it later as trade-in value along with another guitar that I bought off a friend for $100, similar kind of Strat-ish type thing. Put it on layaway, and I was able to get myself a Les Paul.
Nice.
And I still play with that when I played with Classic Albums Live, and I did Rush 2112. The pickups I had replaced. My pal Mike Sloot replaced the pickups, but that was the guitar I used professionally, and it's still a fantastic guitar. I still enjoy playing it, and I had it since I was 15.
Okay, so on your website you talk about wanting to pursue music professionally, but stopped that by the age of 19. Tell me about, obviously that's not the case, but Tell me about what that dream was back then and how you pursued it.
Well, I think the way I word that is I retired at the age of 19 in order to begin that pursuit, because you just do the thing that you think is required of you. You do the whole going to school, and I went to study software at Mohawk College, and I barely made it through 1 year of that, and it wasn't happening. I was looking at these people around me that were making games since they were 9, 10 years old, right. And I was just struggling through first year. I could appreciate the syntax and the logic, and the flow of logic and everything, and doing loops and all that, just completely understanding, at least on a basic level anyway. I wouldn't say completely, but just this wasn't for me. No, the way that they were sleeping through first years, the way I was sleeping through music class in elementary school, middle school, and high school up to about grade 11 or so, because that's the thing that I really wanted to do. But you didn't really know what you wanted to do, because I was a very, very sheltered kid in a waspy neighborhood in Hamilton, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. All I knew was I knew I didn't want to be there, and just somehow play music. That's all I really wanted to do, was play music.
And what did that mean in your mind?
I didn't have anything specific. I just found whatever I could find. I played in a band every weekend at this little church on the South Mountain, and church is a very loose usage of the term, because it was basically run by an atheist academic under the auspices of the United Church, but it gave me such an outlet to play once or twice a week with this band for about 5 or 6, maybe 7 years.
What kind of music?
It started as the kind of, the whole Christian rock thing, but then I basically secularized the band. and it made for a really, really great thing to just get my chops together and learn how to play for the song and not for me. That took many, many years, because when you're young, a lot of the time when you're playing and you're playing, especially as a guitar player, because it's it's a very phallic instrument in its presentation, and you kind of want to show what you can do with it. And over time, of course, you realize, no, you're not playing for you. You're playing for the song. You're playing for the band, for the project, for the show, whatever it is. And when you play every week, and you start to learn how to do it more for those things and not for yourself. And very valuable stuff for when you get out there playing professionally, because it's definitely not about you. It's about the larger project at hand.
I don't know how many people realize that at such a young age.
Well, I didn't. It's funny, now I can say that, but for sure in my early to mid-20s is when I started figuring that out. Maybe not even consciously, abstractly at best, I'd say. But then you get into musical theater and you're reading charts, and it's just, you're not playing for you, you're playing for the thing.
Which makes sense. So how did that musical theater gig happen?
Well, my first musical theater gig, my first proper one, I would say, was Evita. I had to learn that book on, I think, maybe 72 days notice. Days, 3 days, 72 hours notice. And it's a very complicated book. If you've ever heard that soundtrack or seen that show, there's a lot of funny time signatures, and it's really interesting music.
So how did that happen? In a way, like, was it a dream of yours to get into musical theater?
No, not really. I mean, I had this distant vision that I could get into that Queen musical, which I eventually did, the We Will Rock You show. And I had a bunch of people around me saying it was a pipe dream and it wasn't going to happen, which, of course, your instinct is great. Get away from these people.
But you must have been a pretty decent reader in order to be able to even have the thought of pursuing going after a musician role in a musical theater.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a great reader, but I'm a decent reader. And so I had to work really, really hard when I received those charts and I had those 2 or 3 days notice. Oh yeah, I had to really stay up till 4 a.m. and internalize as much of it as I could. And so I remember showing up to the rehearsal the next day, and the first act, no problem, because I painstakingly went through it all evening into the early morning. And then the second half I kind of sight read through to very mixed results. And then the next rehearsal, then I got through both acts and I did okay.
But you had the gig already, or?
Oh yeah, I was in there. So just a friend just said, show up. He didn't even say what it was. He just said, show up with a guitar at this place at noon on Sunday or Monday, and that was it. And I did, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And because the book was, about an inch thick, it was a lot of music in that book, and whatever. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I remember it being this giant thing that I could just plop on a table because it was a thick book, complicated music, but I'm so glad that was where it kind of started, because it set a really high standard. Because a lot of stuff just a lot of music, even as a professional musician, isn't very difficult to play. But there's a certain sensibility required to play it, and you have to get a certain feel, a certain sound, whatever. But just in terms of the technical requirements to play this music, it was challenging. I mean, there was stuff in 5/8, 7/8 time, I remember. Some just really interesting key changes, but one of the simplest bits is this little melody that's in the second half. And I remember I missed it at the dress rehearsal, and her name was Jenny, the MD, musical director. She was wonderful, and Jenny Peace was her name. And I can even sing you the line right now. boom, with a rit at the end. And I knew the line, but you're just nervous and clammy because you have all these things to think about. But this is the one exposed, serious guitar line in the show. And I promised her I will not miss this line. And I didn't. I got it at every show, and that was fine. And she just kind of breathed a sigh of relief the first couple of shows when I got it. And then she didn't have to look at me again after that. So when she cued it in, just looking petrified, just, oh, is he going to get this? And but no, I got it. I messed up other little tinier, not so consequential things, but that was one of those just, you just are so exposed. You have to play this melody properly. And just all kinds of songs have those iconic, important lines that you just have to play right. You can get all these little things wrong. You can hide in the bushes, play quietly, miss these little things, but the things that stick out, you have to get those parts right. No questions asked.
Before this experience, I presume you might have been in a school band, so you would have had some discipline in reading charts and playing that like that?
Oh, yeah. High school orchestra, absolutely. Being a not morning person, can you imagine me at 14, 15, 16 years old, 3 days a week, having to get to school for 7:15 a.m. because orchestra rehearsal was before first period? I did this for 4 years. I don't know how, but I did it. And it was so valuable, absolutely, being in a large ensemble. And I loved a lot of that music, absolutely. I mean, that kind of started in middle school, but the music got better, of course, in high school. And oh yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed playing anything from Baroque, classical, romantic era, 20th century music to doing Elvis and disco medleys that they would arrange for orchestra, and I was the bass player, and so because that's the closest thing to a guitar in high school band. So yeah, very valuable experience.
That experience of working in Avita, did you think, okay, I want to start to focus on doing more musical theater stuff, or where was your head at that point?
Well, I got to remember the actual timeline. In the back of my head, this idea that the We Will Rock You thing might happen was always there, because I'd been in touch with Brian May a couple of years before then, Queen's guitarist Brian May, and he told me that Toronto was going to be the next city they were going to do it in, because initially I wanted to do an audition in Las Vegas, and very long story short, that didn't happen, and I'm glad it didn't. Everything would have turned out so much differently had I done it that way, and I wouldn't have gotten the job anyway. So, but like that was the goal. That was ultimately the goal. It wasn't a set goal because there's just so many things outside of your control, as anything, I guess. But as soon as I found out that I was going to Toronto, then I just sent the emails I needed to send, and I got an audition, and that was probably within about a month, maybe 2 months from the Avita gig finishing. So it was always kind of in my head there. Otherwise, I'm not sure what kind of musical theater I would have really pursued, because it wasn't a very high-paying gig. I think it was a high school production at a nice theater, though, that held about 500 people or whatever it was, 700 people in Hamilton, the DeFasco Center, whatever it's called now, on King William Street. But how to do the professional theater thing, well, that was my way in to do the Queen musical, because I could at least do that.
Okay, so the Queen musical, because you're such a huge Brian May and Queen fan, or more than anything else?
At that time, yeah, that was probably my number one.
And would you be, like, before the audition, would you know most of the songs and you could play it like Brian May?
Oh, yeah, I knew it inside out, but at the audition, it was very different because it was musical theater. And in the rule of thumb in musical theater, if there's rock instrumentation, the first thing to go is the guitar solo, and because they only need so many of those. It's all about the figures on stage, the actors and the singers and the choreography, all that stuff, the ensemble, not so much the band. But that's been changing these last 20 or so years, because now in a lot of musical theater, the band's being incorporated into the show, and they're on stage. Sometimes the band has lines, and which is very lucrative for musicians because they're all union jobs, and there's an onstage bonus that you get for being visible and not in a pit. So, sorry, did I answer that question?
Yeah, you did. But I'm curious as to what that audition process was like, and did you put, like, What to you did this mean everything?
Well, yeah, it's funny. Hindsight's 2020, as we all know, but I just knew how much was at stake. I needed to do something with my life. I needed to get out of Hamilton, and and this was just a massive, massive opportunity. So they sent me the charts, and there was there were two guitar parts, and we were doing 5 songs, and you had to learn both parts for the 5 songs. So that was basically you had to learn 10 things, and I knew. I don't know how this was my instinct, but I thought I do not want to be reading these parts. I'll have the charts there as a backup, sure, but you know, but Brian's going to eventually be there. I mean, eventually it was the second audition, and it was all okay. No, Brian's going to be there, and I'm not going to have my nose buried in a book. And whoever's here for the first audition, I don't want my nose to be buried in the book. And that turned out to be probably the smartest decision I made, either by accident or otherwise, because yeah, Brian sends a guy, and in this case it was Elliot Ware was his name, and he had been musical director of this show for years in London, and he later did Quadrophenia, worked with Pete Townsend, a wonderful guy, Elliot, and so he's basically Brian's eyes and ears until he shows up, and right away I connected with him. And you probably shouldn't say that because it doesn't sound very fair, but that's what it was. And then so I got through that, and the second audition, Tristan Avakian and I.
Sorry, can I just go back to that first audition?
Yeah.
What is that like? Paint that picture for me.
I have absolutely no idea what's going on. I was given very good advice from a friend who said, just go and keep your mouth shut and don't talk to the other players because there might be people who want to throw you off your game. And because it can be quite competitive.
Right.
And looking back on this now, yeah, you think, well, New York's a bigger city, LA's a bigger city, so therefore things will be more competitive there. No, there's more work to go around in those places, especially in New York. So no, it's way less competitive. In Toronto, this is a city with 3 million people, and you can count the number of major theaters on one hand. So there's a lot less work to go around. So I'm not really aware of any of this. As far as I'm aware, I'm just going to do an audition to play Queen songs.
Do you see anybody else auditioning?
Yeah, it's in a band. Okay, so you're in a band with 8 people, and there are lots of other musicians around. I think there were different sittings and seating. Yeah, different seatings, kind of like a dinner, and it was 8 of us in the band. It was 2 guitar, bass, 3 keys, drums, and percussion. I think that's 8. Yeah, 2 guitar, bass, drums, percussion, 3 keys. And one of the keys is musical director. And you're playing either guitar 1 or guitar 2.
No rehearsal.
And yeah, you're just walking into the audition, and that's it. And they're just mixing and matching different players with one another to see who blends well with whom. And they'll get the 2 guitar players to switch, or maybe get the 2 keyboarders to switch, and then they'll take that band, swap out the drummer, and try that one with all of those guys, and then swap out this bass player, and then put that first drummer back in with this bass player, etc., etc. And then all those guys go, and a bunch of other guys come in and try it that way. And so this went on for about 6 hours or so. I think we took one little break for 20 minutes. So that's kind of how that went, the mixing and matching thing. And then by that first break, I realized I was getting along well with Elliot, the guy that Brian sent. And Brian doesn't play with a pick, he plays with an English sixpence. That's a big part of his sound because that serrated edge on that coin is kind of that attack on every note. There's a bit of a, as opposed to a from a pick. It sounds like it's subtle, but all these little ingredients make Brian's sound what it is. And Elliot gave me one of Brian's sixpences that he said he'd given him, and he said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, well, not that I need to be giving this to you now because I'll be seeing you next week. So that was a nice little favor he did for me. So then I knew, okay, my chances are actually quite good.
So when you're doing this rehearsal or this audition, are you and every other guitar player sounding like Brian May?
No, we weren't. And that was the thing. It was Tristan Avakian and I were the rock guys, and the other two guys, they're just Toronto heavyweight, great guitar players, Tony Zorzi and Jim Tate. And they were more jazz guys as far as I know, and they're musical theater guys, extremely experienced doing the musical theater thing. But you get to the second audition, and Brian doesn't know any of the history of who's on the scene and what they do there. Brian and Roger Taylor's there too. They want to select the guys that are going to most be faithful to their music. And so, I mean, no matter any one of those people in that room would have been great on the gig. I mean, we listened to it; it always sounded good. But Brian and Roger know what they're listening for. They know what their music is, and they just have their vision for how they want it to sound. But you don't want to sound exactly like them because, again, it's in a musical theater context. So there's all these things to balance, and so. But they just pick the guys that they think are going to be the right guys for what their music requires. And Tristan and I were the guitar players that they got, and so that's just how it went.
How confident were you going into this whole thing? Of you as a player, of you getting this gig?
I knew what I was doing. I was not worried at all about what I was playing. I wasn't nervous going in. I mean, you're always a little nervous, but I wasn't. A lot of the time, nervousness is being worried about some variable that you don't know, and that was not the case at all with this, because I knew my parts inside out with this music. I really studied for 2 or 3 weeks these charts, and I knew going in what I was doing. So, but yeah, of course you're still nervous because there's a lot going on in this room, and you've been parachuted into this thing with these obviously very experienced musicians, and you're the kid from Hamilton who nobody knows, that's just walking in, and you just have no idea. These guys all know each other, whatever. But I didn't really preoccupy myself with that. I kind of noticed it, but I was so unilaterally focused on I need to be able to do this, and I need to get this job. So to answer your question, first time in, you don't really know how many other musicians you're up against because the audition started at 9. I was asked to come in at 12 or 12:30. It was 12:30. And I'm there until 4 something, 5 something. So there were players before me and there were players after me, so I didn't know. The second audition happens, and the first one was at the Elgin Theater, and the second one was at Cherry Beach. And there were the same 4 guitar players and one other guy that got in to play one song. He somehow elbowed his way into the audition and missed his first major cue. So he only played one song, and he was kind of kindly asked to leave, I think, or something like that. Very nice guy, though. I even helped him with the gear, I remember that. But it was basically the 4 of us. So in my mind, when I realized it was just 2 bands of 8, 16 guys, and there's 8, I just realized, oh my goodness, I have a 50-50 chance of getting this gig, because you counted the other musicians, and only us 4 guitar players, and that was it. And then in walk Brian and Roger, and it's my first time meeting Brian at that time, and Brian was so nice. He wasn't feeling well that day, I later found out, and he brought his camera. He's a big photography guy, stereo photography, especially that Victorian photography stuff, 3D photography. But he brought his regular camera, and he took a photo of every musician. That's the first thing he did, because he just that showed me what a thoughtful guy he was. He just wanted to remember every single person that he met, and just to document this for himself, because that made it matter to him. And that left such an impression on me of just his character, that he wasn't just doing this and kind of going through the motions or whatever. It was just clearly important enough to him that he wanted to remember every single person when he was going to be making his decisions.
Wow. Okay, so tell me about the moment you found out.
Well, this is the first Max Webster connection to this little story now, because I didn't have a cell phone at this time, and I had to go home to Hamilton, and so yeah, I had to take a bus or a train back to Hamilton. But Kim Mitchell at this point was doing his gig at Q107, and he had been doing it for a couple years at this point. And you imagine this, I went from auditioning for one Guitar Hero to another to tell him about it. and I wasn't in a rush to get home. I had to rush to the studio, and I caught Kim in between segments, and he was the first person that I told all about it. And so that
this was
really
part
neat.
of the interview that Q107 set up with you to say what you've been up to?
It wasn't so much an interview, no. It was just me voluntarily going to visit Kim because he was just so easily accessible to go and just say hi. Because it was right at Yonge and Dundas. You could just see him through the glass and knock on the glass and say hi. And if he wasn't busy, he would always, every single time, he would say hi. And so I get home, and so after meeting with him, and he was really cool and encouraging about it, because I'd met Kim so many times before then, too, for many years. And so I get back to Hamilton, and there's a message on my voicemail from the contractor saying I got the gig. And of course, the single most exciting moment of my life up to that point. It was absolutely deliriously wonderful. And also on that voicemail was an invitation to come back to Toronto the next day because there's going to be a press conference, and Brian had invited the band to come while he does all his press stuff. And he just wanted everyone to be there because, he wanted to then congratulate everyone who was in the band. And so Brian was great like that. So then you find out which of these guys you auditioned with are on the gig. And then after that, I went back to the Q107 studio, which is right there because it was at the Cannon Theatre, now the Mirvish Theatre, which is just spitting distance away,
right.
30-second walk. And then I went back to the studio and said hi to Kim. And he said, how did it go? And I said, Kim, I got the gig. And he was so happy for me. So Kim's been around in one way or another, for many years around this, long before I decided to do this book.
That's so cool. I guess at that point, does your life change?
Completely. I moved to Toronto. I moved from being in a basement, a friend's basement. Actually, the minister of that so-called church, that wonderful academic who was running a school in a church, basically, doing biblical criticism, very serious stuff, actually, but very interesting stuff. I was staying in his basement, and I moved from that to living in a condo on Yonge Street, 34th floor, facing the Toronto skyline. So there's some incremental steps that I've missed in there, clearly. And professionally, I later realized there were incremental steps I missed, from playing small musical theater gigs and playing in small bands to basically playing the best gig, as far as I was aware, the best gig for a Canadian rock guitar player in the country. So of course, your life changes. You do a musical theater gig ultimately for a couple of years, and you're making some pretty decent bread. It's a union A scale pay, and I'm just living in beautiful homes in Toronto, and just living it up and really enjoying it, and making various poor decisions as a 24, 25-year-old would.
Well, yeah.
In no situation, yeah.
And you get money, but what was that like to just go from semi-professional gigs to a very professional gig? Like, what was that learning curve like?
It was pretty swift, and the lessons came fast and hard. And because, of course, you make rookie mistakes. And so, the lessons came very, very fast. And
you also have to keep it fresh every day.
Oh,
which is, I don't know how difficult that is, but I can see that could be a challenge.
Yeah, some of your very favorite music, and you're playing it 8 times a week for years. That's what musical theater or any kind of theater is like. And just, keeping it fresh for yourself, though, it's very hard. And so, but you find a way through it. And some days you're just into it more than you're into it other days. But you get to a mindset where it's just, no. People are paying so much money to be experiencing this once. And for them, the majority of those people out there, they're experiencing this once. And you want to play this for them as if it is their one and only time. So try to get in the mindset of playing it as if it's your one and only time, because that's what it is for them. So give them that. They're paying a lot of money to be there. Just, you don't want them to feel like anyone that is entertaining them is phoning it in or bringing their personal problems to the theater or to the stage. And because that's the whole point of what we do. That came to me very quickly, realizing just, people, they leave their problems behind to come to a concert or to a show, whatever it may be. um, consuming whatever they're consuming, however they're consuming it, and they want to be. Perhaps they want something thought-provoking, but overwhelmingly, people want something that's entertaining. So they're not having to do that, and they want it to be absolutely amazing. And you need to give it, and you have your off nights. Everybody does, and anyone's lying if they say they don't. But that becomes your goal. It's just they're coming once, so give them the absolute best show that you can.
What does this do to you as a musician?
Well, your discipline in that sense improves, but there's a thing called show chops where you're so good at that one thing and that you don't really do much else. And so, and that took a long time to actually realize that. I wasn't doing really much else musically.
Well, you don't have time either.
Yes, you do. You have time during the day. I mean, you don't have matinees every day. The matinees were Wednesday and Sunday. Wednesday. I had 4 days of most weeks that weren't show days, and so you could be doing other things, and but you're making great money, and you just have other priorities in life, and you're playing plenty. You're playing 1 or 2 shows a day most days. Mondays are dark, 8 shows a week, and there was definitely part of me that was coasting. And years later, when I did this show again, I did a U.S. tour with a whole different company, and some of the same familiar faces that were in the Toronto production, but mostly new faces behind the scenes and on stage. And we did it much, much better that time. We had decided we're gonna travel on Mondays with traveling day, and we're gonna book an open mic in the new city on the Monday night, and one of us would book it, and we would just do the whatever that we would be doing that wasn't our show. You had to keep yourself sane and do something else. So the one guy, Tristan, was writing an album, and I was developing my solo acoustic show, it turned out, by accident. But that's what I was doing, just to do something else. That's when I got comfortable behind a mic, talking to people between songs and doing my little storytelling and telling my jokes. But then just developing a solo acoustic repertoire. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made, was when you have a full-time gig like that, you have to have something else going on to keep you fresh and interested and curious about something else. That's the mistake that I made the first time, was having only that thing being the thing.
Although I can understand why that would have happened. So when the show ended the first time, what happened to you?
I played in another band and I did teaching, but the income wasn't coming, and I never worked harder than I did in that period. And of course I couldn't afford to live in Toronto anymore, so I went back to Hamilton, lived with my best friend for 3 years in a wonderful apartment, and those were really, really good years. And just kind of started over from scratch, playing in different bands. I got into Classic Albums Live, and then a new version of We'll Rock You was brought to my attention, and I went to New York, auditioned for that one, got that gig, and that kind of began the next epoch of my life, where I did that show in so much of a better way, in a healthy way. I did a lot of growing up in that kind of intermediary period between those 2 versions of that show. And
can you just give me an example of what that means?
Well, because I kind of alluded to, I skipped a lot of steps from what I was doing before I was 24, and playing smaller musical theater, playing in small bands, and then playing a massive, massive musical theater gig. And those intermediate steps, playing in kind of slightly bigger bands, playing in bars, playing outdoor festivals, playing corporate gigs, playing in casinos. Those are the kind of things I should have perhaps done before doing a major, major musical theater gig.
Right.
Because it's not just the musical stuff, it's the business side of things. It's learning how to be a proper self-employed person, not just doing your books, which is of course a big part of it too. Just running yourself as a business, as it were. But just being responsible for yourself, and when you're in bands like that, you start taking care of making phone calls with agents and and whoever the promoter of the gig is, and sorting out things with them, or doing your accommodations for the gig or rentals for the gig, and in booking your transportation to get to the gig, and all of these things, that kind of responsibility, just that was a big learning curve. And to play in bands like that and take on leadership roles like that, it makes you a more well-rounded person. And of course, these guys you're playing with when you play serious professional gigs, of course they've done all those kinds of things too. A lot of those players, anyway, probably most of them. So the second time around that I get the We Will Rock You gig and I'm playing in musical theater, and it's just you're a more well-rounded person because you've just done a way wider variety of shows and bands and different things that you've done.
Okay, so one of the things you mentioned, the classic albums live. I presume that probably takes the same kind of discipline as your musical theater gig.
Yeah, it's
and
very
that would
similar.
have been a great training ground for auditioning for that role.
Yeah, you're right. So it's a wonder I managed to pass in the audition the first time around, because a lot of those intermediate steps hadn't been taken. So, but because I'd done that, then doing the classic albums live thing, I wouldn't even say that was a step backwards. That wouldn't be fair to that, because there's some serious musicians who are part of that.
Sure.
And
so I meant more like the musical discipline you have to have in
Yeah.
order to present is similar between the musical theater and
Oh yeah, because I mean you're learning to play these records note for note, and so I mean the first one I did was Led Zeppelin 4, and so there's three guitarists, Damien, I'm gonna say his last name wrong, but a wonderful guy named Damien, Arokium I think was his name. Damien, don't send me angry hate mail. I got your name wrong. And Des Leahy on guitar, and it was the three of us. And because a lot of those Jimmy Page parts were layered on those records, and you needed three guys, absolutely. And it was a great band, 7-8 piece band. Chris Henry on drums, Lindsey Clark on keys, but also me on keys. I tripled. I doubled as a keyboardist on the No Quarter in the second half, and I played mandolin on the album for Battle of Evermore and Going to California. And so that's kind of what got me in, just, you can play three instruments, fabulous. And so that was a quick trip, because there was only 2 rehearsals, and then boom, we're playing a theater in Ottawa. And it's just, oh my God, are you kidding me? 2 rehearsals? And yeah, so that the gig felt like a dress rehearsal, and then we should have played 6 gigs or 10 gigs, toured it, but it was only just the one gig. So that's unfinished business in my life. I would love to play Led Zeppelin in public with a band, even just a couple times, and but it was still a great gig, and Phil Nera was on vocals for that. The late Phil Nera. Yeah. So that was a really, really great band, and Mark Yanetta was on bass. I think that's everyone. That was a really, really good band.
What's your improvisational skills like?
Decent, but not great, because I'm a more structured player. This is why I've played musical theater and classic albums live, and played in tribute bands and stuff like that. I love doing that stuff, but I'm not really a jazz player, especially. So I'm a more of a structured player than a loosely free player. But if you put me in the right situation, especially if you give me a guitar that I'm unfamiliar with, that's what's interesting. Give me a Telecaster, and put me in an improvisational place, and of course I can improvise, but I'm not Pat Metheny. I don't have his mind.
Really?
Yeah, I know, but I don't have that kind of mind, and because that's just the thing. My kung fu in music has been getting inside the head of someone who's done something and try to be faithful to it. But you still put your little stamp on things as well. I don't want to mimic things exactly, depending on the situation. A lot of the time you have that freedom to kind of still be yourself, and you want to be, depending on the situation. But that's my discipline. And that comes from the classical training for sure when I was a kid. But I just learned music to be a puzzle, and you read the music and you try to achieve this thing. This is what it's supposed to sound like, and that's a very good skill to have. That can get you a lot of work, but the part of me that wants to improvise more, or that could do that, I definitely haven't done enough of that. So I'm decent at it, but I'm not great at it.
But it doesn't sound like you. I mean, you've done a lot of stuff, right? And whether it be musical theater or tribute bands, I mean, you seem to have managed to keep yourself quite busy.
Yeah, I mean, there's leaner years than others, and there's other years where you make half as much as a congressman, and anything in between. And so yeah, I definitely have done lots of different stuff, and but yeah, it would be nice to be part of something where it's not nearly as structured. And I'm kind of doing a band like that now, which is great. Where we walk into these rehearsals. I'm doing one tonight, and we don't play the songs the same way twice, and I'm really enjoying that. Just playing with these pieces, and it's in pre-production for an album, and it's never the same way twice, and I'm really enjoying that. Being that kind of player, that just I just search for things and find little holes and try to be an ornamental decorate music the way Frank Zappa would say. Music is, here's a chunk of time, now decorate it. And this is, I think, the first time I'm really getting to play in a band like this, and I'm really, really enjoying it.
So the other thing that you have done is write. And I don't know how long you've been writing for, but one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was about your Max Webster book. But I get the impression that writing has been a big part of your life for a while. Whether it be not a book, but just even your blog. The fact that you like to do concert reviews, you like to write about things, about music.
You did your homework. Yeah. My blog has been there for years, and it's funny. You can go look back at the earlier things I wrote, and that you can absolutely see my writing chops kind of showing up over time with that. I began, of course, writing on internet forums, as many of us did, getting the internet in the early or mid to late 90s rather. And so yeah, I mean, there were internet forums, music forums, of course, right, for my favorite bands that I would be a member of. And I once looked back at some of that stuff I wrote when I was 18 years old, 20 years old, 22 years old, and just being horrified at my writing. But it was so interesting to look back at some of that stuff, because what I ended up realizing was I just learned to make myself more concise, yet you're not losing any of what makes you able to be understood. I forget who said this quote. Probably one of those ancient philosophers. His name is started with a Q. Probably some Greek philosopher who said, "Don't aim to make yourself understood. Make yourself impossible to be misunderstood." And that since getting that into my head, that's really informed my writing. And that absolutely, you want to be concise. And I'm kind of the same way as a musician now. 20 years ago, if I played in a band, it's all, wow, look at me and how I can play, and look, I'm such a good guitar player, blah, 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 all that stuff. You're young, and you're phallically waving your guitar around. But no, you play for the song. No, you write for the subject. It's not about you. It's coming through you, but the subject is what is important. And you want to make sure that anyone who is reading this will not be misunderstanding you. And if they don't care, that's fine. Not everybody has to care about the subject. But if you write with that mentality to ensure that there's no one reading this that's going to misunderstand you, then I think that's when you're going to be on the right track.
I can't help but think that you love writing.
I do.
That it's a discipline that you work at, but it's something that you enjoy really doing.
Yeah, of course, like anything. I mean, I always have enjoyed reading. I've enjoyed writing. But when I was much, much younger in school, I didn't find much to read that I enjoyed. I didn't find much to write about that I enjoyed. And you were just limited to what you were exposed to. And I was extremely, extremely limited and sheltered in what I had exposure to and access to. And it wasn't really until my 20s I started to find more things that I'd be interested in. Late teens, certainly, but for sure by my early 20s. And so yeah, I think that's always been true. I mean, there's a photo of me somewhere in this world. I don't know where this photo is, but I'm 4 years old in kindergarten. I'm the one kid who's sitting down reading a book. That's always been there. And all the kids were playing with toys and whatever, and just getting up to whatever nonsense they were getting up to. But I was the kid who was reading. And then I stopped being that kid, and that's another story. But then I kind of came back around and became the kid that reads again, the older kid. By later in high school, starting to read books again and started writing and whatever I wanted to do around that. But I didn't really have any ambitions to be a proper writer until this idea for this book happened. I mean, I had websites for my favorite bands and their concert history, and I guess that makes you a writer, quote unquote. But the book idea showed up in, I'd say, 2019.
Okay.
And that's when I decided this thing I'm doing for the Max Webster thing, it wasn't going to become a documentary at that point. That was kind of a dead end then at that point. And I'm going to decide, I
Sorry,
decided
was
I'm
that
going
an
to write a
option?
book.
Was that something you were pursuing initially?
It was, and that's a whole other discussion as to why that didn't come to fruition. But then I was all, okay, now I'm going to write a book. And I've no idea if I had the chops to do this, but no one said I couldn't. And I just saw it as a duty that I had to do this, because it's a massive band that so many thousands and thousands of people still love, and there's no documentary on this band. There's been no archival work done on this band, and there's no major book on this band. Martin Popoff did a paperback on Max, and I'm so glad he did that, and that kind of began this renaissance of interest in Max Webster. And I just thought, great, I just want to fill in some blanks, and I just want to kind of take it a step further. I want to have the travelogue with all the concert dates and talk about the recording career, the creative process. And I found tapes of, all kinds of studio outtakes and live recordings and stuff. And it became a fascinating education about just the process, the creative process of this band, and just them, how they evolved as a band on stage and in the studio. And I started writing about it, and I was all just, no, I need to actually do this as a book, not as a thing that's just for my personal delight. And so I spent several years, and I put all this together, and I knocked on so many doors to find the photos and find stuff in archives.
And what was that like? Was
Amazing.
it? I mean, was it an impossible task? Were people very helpful?
Yes, people were amazing. I have this completely unrealistically high opinion of people, and I hate the way that sounds, because I've been so lucky. People in most you don't want to speak for everyone, because your sample size is what it is, but just so many people go to work or they do projects, and they have so much they're just roadblock, and just people saying yes, people saying no, and just I'd say at least 95% of the doors I knocked on opened, and people were so generous and kind and helpful. And there's a small handful of photos and recordings that I know of that are out there that I haven't been able to get my hands on, because people were so awesome and helped me with this project. I mean, I got access to archives, the invitation only thing, where it's like you're a stamp collector, and they give you the tweezers and the gloves to handle the negatives and in the magnifying glass, and you just look at these negatives and put them on a screen, and just decide, okay, I got to take these dozen, and they'll give you those ones for free, and they'll send you the scans. And so that kind of thing. And then I went through the library and found all the old microfiche before you could go to newspapers.com, and it was digitized, and you could search by keyword. No. 8 years ago, when I started doing this, you had to go through the microfiche. You had to load in the microfilm to a microfilm reader and go through it manually. Okay, entertainment section is C3. Okay, scroll ahead to C3, and just go through it randomly, manually, I should say, until you found the date, and maybe you'll find the concert review, or you'll find the ads for other concert dates, whatever it was. And this was a very painstaking process. And this is where it's like you're doing a PhD thesis on a band, and you're just spending endless hours. I'm sure they were just bored of seeing my face at this library. I was showing up daily for months, going through all these old newspapers to find the concert dates. But I have no regrets doing it that way, because it was so much fun. You kidding me? Finding out how much the world has changed, how much the world hasn't changed. Going through the sports section for fun and finding an article from 1978 says Maple Leafs lose to the Islanders in overtime. It was wonderful. Nothing has changed. So I so enjoyed that part of it too.
So I'm very curious, because we talked about this. You were not even born when the band broke up.
Yeah, I was -1 years old.
So what was it? And I've also seen you clip playing Lily, one of my favorite songs. So you obviously have a connection to the band, but where does that connection come from? Or at what point did you think, I need to do this on this band?
It's always been one of my favorite bands, and I love the band, and just to me it was necessity, just because no one had done this. There's tons of Pink Floyd books and Led Zeppelin books and just Beatles and all these great bands. And of course, you go outside of Ontario and you won't find a ton of people who really love Max Webster. You'll find some, but not high concentrations of them. But around here in Toronto, there are just thousands, probably tens of thousands of massive Max Webster fans who saw that band. I mean, they filled Maple Leaf Gardens 3 times in 18 months. I mean, you can count on one hand the number of artists that did that in that period. You play 1, maybe 2 nights, but not 3. So that was a big band. And so yeah, I just thought people love this band, and this just needs to be done. And it's funny, you look back on it now, and you spend this amount of time, and most people won't do this. Even as music collectors, there's tons of these guys who will collect their favorite band. They try to find every recording, every radio broadcast, every bootleg tape, audience recordings, whatever, of their favorite band, and they will listen to every one. There's no shortage of people like that who really love an artist like that. But when you do this as a musician, what you do when you follow a band like that and you get into their heads night to night, you listen to 100, 200, 300 recordings of a band that you love, you start learning things about yourself as a musician, because you start seeing their trajectory, you see their evolution as musicians, as individuals, and as a collective. And so maybe there's a bit of a selfish motivator there, because you do this because you're learning about yourself too. That was a nice little unconscious reward, I guess, from doing this kind of thing. But basically, on a more simple level, you're just archiving a band, and every major artist has someone who is officially or unofficially just archiving their history, finding all the photos and everything that's been written about them, finding any radio broadcasts, finding just newspaper articles, everything you possibly can, recordings, just to document the history of a band. And this had not happened for Max Webster. And I just thought someone needs to do this. And I was doing that before I decided I even wanted to write the book. Because you mentioned that Max Webster box set,
Right.
The Party. Yeah, I worked on that. And so this is long before I decided I wanted to write the book. That was in 2017. And I just thought, yeah, this needs to be done. And great, now they're doing a box set. Now they're coming to me because I did this website on their history. This is all just part of one giant thing that I was doing.
Was there a point where you thought, oh, this might not happen? Or once you decided that this would happen, was it full steam ahead?
For me, it was full steam ahead, but there were so many variables beyond your control. There are so many. There are few people. And I don't care who this upsets when I say this. I dislike people so much who say, I'm a self-made man. That is the biggest lie we have been told, that we think that we are self-made. Everything is collaborative. We got help in everything from when we were 4 years old and we were being driven to school on roads that we did not pave, in cars we did not build, powered by gasoline that we did not pump, by oil that was refined by someone who was kept awake by a cup of coffee with beans that he did not produce. Just everything, we've had help, if you trace anything back far enough. And for this project, just I cannot tell you how much help I had. You can just read the acknowledgements pages in the back, because it's multiple pages, plural, of people who helped me, hundreds of names of people who helped me in major and minor ways and everything in between. And just the process of finding a printer and getting it printed and having a customs broker get it shipped from England to here, and to get it through customs and get it to a warehouse, and before that, just finding all these photographers with the photos of the band, all the connections made to get into archives and to get recordings, and all these things to put together so you have your archival project with your final statement of it, as it were, the book, and all this stuff on the business end to those mechanisms to make that thing physically exist in an affordable way, to get those sent here on a ship, and then you pay the tax as it comes into the country, and set up a book release event and get all these people to come. All of these things, just any one of those major things doesn't happen and the project fails. So yeah, so to answer your question, were there any moments where it was harrowing and you thought it wouldn't happen? Yeah, that was called the year before the book release party every goddamn day, and just existential crisis after existential crisis, because there are so many things that need to binary switches that have to switch on in your favor. People who have to be fighting in your corner, conspiring in your favor to make these things happen for you. Because if they don't happen, there is no book and there's no event and there's no band members coming to the event telling you that they are grateful that you did this.
So now that you accomplished this and you have this physical book and the band members did show up to the book launch, what next? What does it, like, obviously it gives you confidence that you can do this.
Yeah.
And it's years of work and you finished it. Is there something else that will come out of this? Like, would you want to do another book, or does the confidence in you make you want to do many other things?
Yes.
You don't have to tell me about what it is, but
yeah.
I mean, obviously, it must be a great feeling to work on something for years and see the finished product.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely one of the best feelings in the world, no question. To know that however it happened, that it finally did happen, and that all the time that was spent on this, that came to fruition. Of course, that's wonderful. It's funny, the question that you asked is kind of like when you go up to a 22-year-old who has just graduated university, and they're stuck with all this student debt, and they've accomplished this massive thing, the biggest thing they've ever done, and then somebody asks them, okay, what do you want to do with your degree? Oh God, they won't tell you this, but they just want to punch all those people in the head and tell them, can I not just please enjoy this thing I've achieved? But I don't feel, of course, that strongly about it. But there still is a bit of that, of the whole, well, no, I'm just kind of, I mean, that was back in June, the book came out, and, you know, I've had my period of enjoying it and kind of basking in that a little bit. But I'm definitely not in a rush to do the next thing. But absolutely, you're right. It gives you the confidence to just, because you know that, okay, this is, of course, going to give you a bit of, I guess, street cred, and because you're able to do this. And so, yeah, people listen to you and look at you in a different way once you finish something. I've really noticed this. And that's been really gratifying too, actually, is just the way that people really listen to you carefully. And they want to know these things of how this happened, and people coming to you for advice on how to do similar projects. And so, yeah, so of course it kind of gives you a kind of a second wind, second lease on life, as it were. And of course it makes you want to do other things. And no, I haven't specifically decided anything I want to do, but absolutely, of course, there's something I'm going to want to do. I don't think it'll be another bio on a band, but if somebody wants to commission me to do it, of course, I'd be open to that. But I never want to repeat myself. I never want to go back and do the same thing again. And I don't know if I would ever do a book that I enjoyed as much as this one. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But whatever it's going to be, of course I'm going to do something else. And I've got a dozen ideas of things I want to do. And if I finish one or two of them, I'll be thrilled. But I'm in no huge rush to do it yet.
So the other thing you do, and the reason why this interview has taken a little longer than it might have been, was because you also work on cruise ships.
Yeah.
And so so I think what you mentioned before about developing a solo career in the second run of We Will Rock You and starting to work on your solo material.
Yeah.
I presume that this is part of that.
Yeah.
And then tell me about how that came about.
Well, the drummer from the We Will Rock You tour I did in the States and Canada and Mexico, but mostly a U.S. tour. Danny Young, wonderful guy. He's in Chicago now, I think, and he had some history working on ships. And after the tour had finished for We Will Rock You, Royal Caribbean got in touch with him because he'd worked with them, and they had bought the rights to the show and all the sets and the costumes and the wigs and the guitars and the amps and all the pedal gear, the rest of the guitar equipment from that company. and they were going to put on their version of the show, and his job was at least partly to put together the band. And so he said, "Here's your guitar player." So I got the job. He called me up, and he said, and at this point, you're just back from 2 or 3 weeks from this tour, wondering what your next move is, and you haven't found a home yet because you go away for a year and you put your stuff into storage, and so you hadn't figured out what your next move was going to be, where you're going to live, what city you're going to live in, what country you're going to live in. This is the life of the nomad, and what you do, because to pay to keep a place for a year while you're gone is, in most cases, ludicrous. If it's just you, not if you're with people, whatever, that's fine. But if it's just you, of course, you're not going to keep a home and pay for it while you're gone. So I'm trying to sort this out, and I get this phone call from Danny saying, "Hey, how would you like to play in Europe for 6 months, doing We'll Rock You and playing solo acoustic stuff?" And it's just, oh, this is fabulous, because yeah, I'll do the show, sure, and but this is this thing I've been developing over the last 6 months or so, and I've got a repertoire, and not a large one, but enough. So I booked a solo show for myself, and about 100-something people came. It was wonderful, and I feel like I played terribly, and my jokes were written out on, like, it's like having crib notes, and just I was so nervous because I had so many things to worry about. I had a crew, front of house guy, guitar tech, and it was streamed for people because I'd now met people all over the place, and I wanted them to see this show as well. So a friend was streaming that, and so I had a team of 4 or 5, maybe 6 people, a runner for sure, who brought me my dinner and whatever else, because I had so many hats to wear. And that was the first major event I did like that, where I was coordinating everything, and at least much of it. No, pretty much everything. and so I didn't play very well, but because you have to get better at that. But everybody in the room was still on your side, I remember the first thing I said after the first song, because Nickelback was playing in Hamilton that night, and I remember my first thing I said was, "Thank you for not coming to see Nickelback tonight," and yeah, and that just really set the tone for what kind of night it was going to be. It was a really wonderful night, and then of course your chops and your sensibilities improve over time, because I was so nervous playing a proper solo show for the first time. But it was a kind of to get the hang of it before I do a ship gig, and it turned out, yeah, I was doing 5-6 nights a week on a ship and developing my repertoire, asking the audience for requests so they could tell me their ideas of what they want a solo acoustic guy to play. And I wasn't doing American Pie and Piano Man and Brown Eyed Girl and stuff like that. Just and people kind of asked for that stuff, but people were asking for stuff off Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, and people wanted to hear Yes Roundabout because it was English guests. We were going around Europe, around the Mediterranean, and to the Canary Islands and stuff, and so there was at least as much of that kind of stuff being requested. Can you play the early Genesis, the early Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac? And it's just, oh really? This is what people want to hear? Cool, this is fabulous. So this really, really worked out well, and I was developing this repertoire, and then I remember just getting the request of, can you do Time by Floyd? And can you do Money and Us and Them and Brain Damage? And then I realized, oh my God, I just had to learn a couple more of these pieces, and I can learn the entire album. And then I just became that guy that does full albums. And it's just, not a lot of people do this stuff, I guess. I don't know if I've ever found anyone who does it kind of this particular way, where I just use a looper pedal and I layer the parts. And if I'm lucky, the way I did on my last ship gig, I did a month in Alaska, there was a piano next to me, so I looped the guitar parts and played piano parts on top of it. So and just come up with these larger arrangements of all of this stuff, and just people really, really seem to like this. So I've been doing this on and off now for about 8 years, and I play my own stuff too. People will inevitably get curious, hey, have you been writing your own stuff? And, well, yes, I do. And then you go into radio voice, and here's my album sitting right over here. And you sell your albums. And so I have my LPs and my CDs, and so I play that stuff on ships too, which is insane when you think about it. So you picture a cruise ship entertainer, he's wearing a suit and playing either classical or jazz or really top 40 stuff to his or her demographic. And just no, I don't do that. And of course, what I do isn't for everybody, but for the people who get it, just it really, really works out pretty well every time. So that's been a nice little fortunate thing that's happened completely by accident, like most things in my life.
But as I said before, it started with wanting to be a musician, and somehow you've made it work.
Well, you kind of just create jobs for yourself, and just by accident, I didn't consciously think of how am I going to create jobs for myself. It's just kind of the way it happened.
Yeah.
And I've managed to turn my two favorite bands into careers. I did the Queen thing in many different ways, in a lot of different bands and scenarios, and a little bit of passive income, and so it buys me a bit of time to think about what the next thing is. And now I can just sleep well at night knowing that just people have really enjoyed this thing. You should read some of the feedback I get back from people.
I'm sure.
It's just because people deeply love this band.
Yeah.
And a big part of music archiving is finding things that have been lost, and it connects people back to, I guess, a simpler time in their lives when music was so central to their lives. And for a lot of them it still is, but really it was at that time. And it brings them back to that time, and it brings back all kinds of wonderful memories. And that's been this nice little kind of accidental benefit from doing all this stuff, is that it just helps people just remember these wonderful times in their life through music that they love.
Well said. Bob, thank you so much for doing this. The work you did in that book is really impressive, and the things that you've accomplished is really impressive.
Well, Margo, thanks for having me and just giving me an opportunity to talk about this stuff. I rarely think about this stuff at this abstract kind of, meta level here. And yeah, this was thoroughly enjoyable for me too, so thanks for having me.
Well, thank you.